Mysteries await just a page away. Ready to dive in? Welcome to The Book Reader, where stories unfold one enchanting page at a time. Subscribe now and unlock the magic.
Richard Branson. Losing My Virginity, the autobiography. Chapter 1. 12 Success Can Take Off Without Warning. 1980-1982. As well as parting from Nick, I came dangerously close to splitting up with Joan in 1980. I was working frantically to keep Virgin afloat, and I knew that Joan was growing increasingly frustrated. No matter how late I got home, the telephone rang. Every time we woke up on a Saturday morning, it rang again. One night, I returned home to the houseboat to find it empty. Joan had gone and left me a note. I am pregnant. I am afraid to tell you. I have run away from home. If you miss me, call me at Rose's. As I looked at the note, I realized that my life had changed. I sat down and thought about what to do. After Kristen had left me, I had had a number of affairs. I loved the variety and the freedom. Ever since she had moved in with me, I feared I had taken Joan too much for granted. My marriage to Kristen had made me skeptical about long-term relationships, and at that time I had not made the same commitment as Joan. I was also under pressure from my parents to get back together with Kristen, or, if not, then to marry some kind of university-educated, tennis-playing girl from Surrey, which Joan emphatically was not. I remember telling my parents that Joan had moved in with me. Dad was fishing on the shore of a lake, and Mum was pointing out a rising trout. In the ensuing silence, Dad flunked his cast, which landed in a tangle. "That's torn it," he said. But when I sat in the houseboat holding Joan's scribbled note and thinking about our unborn baby, I realized that I really loved her. Until that moment, I had been guilty of wanting to have my cake and eat it, having a great relationship without making a commitment to it. I had enjoyed a number of different relationships and had never thought about the consequences. I think lots of men would happily drift through life without having children, unless their partners forced the issue. I called Rose, Joan's sister, and dashed round to be with Joan. About 6 months into Joan's pregnancy, I was in France while Joan was on holiday in Scotland. She had an attack of appendicitis in Fort William. I flew to Scotland to be with her while she was having the operation. In fact, she did not have appendicitis, but an ovarian cyst which had burst, but the doctors decided to go ahead and remove her appendix as well. A dangerous operation at the best of times, but more so on a 6 months pregnant woman. The operation triggered Joan into labor. She was put on a drip to try to reduce the contractions, and we immediately set off in an ambulance to try to reach a more modern hospital at Inverness. The drive across Scotland in the snow was a nightmare. Every jolt of the road set Joan into further contractions. By the time we arrived, she was in agony with the pain of the operation, the pain of the contractions, and desperately trying to keep the baby in. At Inverness Hospital, it became clear that Joan would have to give birth to the baby. There was going to be little chance of the baby surviving, as it was 3 months premature. A baby girl was born who weighed just 4 pounds, and we called her Claire after my aunt. Claire could scarcely feed, and the hospital did not have the necessary equipment to keep her alive. Although Claire did open her lovely deep milky blue eyes, she died after 4 days. All I can remember of her now is her tiny size. Neither of us was allowed to hold or touch her. Her brief home was in an incubator. She was so small she would have fitted into the palm of my hand. We pored over her face, and marveled at her tiny hands, and the determined set to her face as she slept. But now that memory has faded. When I try to remember Claire, my mind is cluttered by the antiseptic smell of the hospital, the metal chairs in our room scraping over the lino, and the look on the nurse's face as she came to tell us that Claire had died. Claire inhabited a world of her own, and came in and out of our lives leaving only despair and emptiness and love behind her. She was so small and lived for so little time that she was almost never here at all. But in that heartbreaking time she brought Joan and me intensely close together. Until I had seen Claire's tiny fragile body, dwarfed by the tiniest nappy, and seen how beautiful she was, and known that she was our baby, I had never thought I would want to have a child. After Claire's death, Joan and I were determined to have another baby, and to our delight Joan became pregnant again within a year. Once again Joan went into labor early, this time by 6 weeks. Both of us were taken by surprise. I was at a party at the venue, and arrived home at 3 in the morning, roaring drunk. I fell into a deep sleep, and only reluctantly woke when I felt Joan slapping me about the face, and shouting that she was having contractions. I fell out of bed, and managed to drive her to hospital. The doctors examined Joan, and led her to the maternity ward. "You look fine," they reassured her. Then they looked at me. "You look terrible. You'd better take these aspirins and go to bed." Sometime later that morning, I was woken up to find 4 doctors peering at me through their masks. I assumed that I had had a terrible accident, and was in a casualty ward somewhere. "Joan is well into labor," they said. "You'd better come with us." Holly was born under 6 pounds in weight. It was the most incredible experience I had ever been through. By the end of it, I was even more exhausted than Joan. I pledged to myself that I'd never miss the birth of one of our children. However, after what had happened to Claire, our immediate concern was keeping Holly alive. We drove back to the houseboat on a freezing cold November morning in 1981, and Joan wrapped Holly up with her in bed. For the rest of the winter they stayed more or less in the bedroom the whole time, while I worked in the room next door. Penny used to walk through the bedroom to her desk, which was tucked between the bilge pump and the stairs. In 1981 Virgin Music finally began to earn some money. Japan had had hit albums with Gentlemen Take Polaroids and Tin Drum. Some of our recent hit singles were XTC's Generals and Majors and SGT Rock, and Ian Gillan's Trouble and New Orleans. The Professionals and the Skids were also successes. We still didn't know what Phil Collins would come up with, and 24th in my list of things to do that month, I arranged to go up to Scotland to a concert by one of our new bands, Simple Minds. Simple Minds' album, New Gold Dream, was a bestseller. The best news of 1981 was that Simon's prediction about the Human League was proved right. Their first 2 albums were quite experimental, and built up a loyal cult following. When we noticed that their sales kept steadily rising, we knew that we had every chance of breaking through. Their 3rd album, Dare, powered into the top 10, and then went to number 1. Dare sold over 1 million copies in Britain, and 3 million around the world. The hit single Don't You Want Me, Baby? Was played over and over again, and became ingrained on everyone's mind. Almost as quickly as they had run out, Virgin's cash balances were now restored. Whenever Virgin has money, I always renew my search for new opportunities. I am continually trying to broaden the group, so we are not dependent on a narrow source of income. But I suspect this is more down to inquisitiveness and restlessness than sound financial sense. This time I thought I saw a perfect opportunity. Since Virgin was an entertainment company, I thought we could publish our own listings magazine called Event. Unfortunately, it was launched at the same time as the highly successful Time Out, and Event lost the battle. It is always difficult to admit to a failure, but the one positive thing about the Event episode was that I realized how important it was to separate the various Virgin companies, so that, if one failed, it would not threaten the rest of the Virgin group. Event was a disaster, but it was a contained disaster. Every successful businessman has failed at some ventures, and most entrepreneurs who run their own companies have been declared bankrupt at least once. Rather than defaulting on our debts, we paid them up and shut down the magazine. The money that Event magazine lost Virgin was rapidly repaid to us by the Human League, Simple Minds, Phil Collins' enormously successful debut solo album, Face Value, and then most spectacularly, by a young singer who called himself Boy George. I first heard of Boy George and Culture Club after Simon went to see them perform at a recording studio in Stoke Newington in 1981. The music publishing rights had already been signed by Virgin, and Simon was intrigued by the startling appearance of their lead singer, a beautiful young drag queen, and the soft, easygoing white reggae they played. Simon invited the band back to Vernon Yard, where they agreed a recording contract. When Simon introduced me to George O'Dowd, I found myself shaking hands with somebody who looked utterly unlike anyone I had ever met before. His long hair was braided like a Rastafarian, he had a pale white face, huge arched eyebrows, and wore the ornate robes of a geisha girl. Although we knew that Culture Club was an extraordinary creation, their first single, White Boy, was stillborn. Virgin released it on April 30th, 1982, but nothing much happened. It sold around 8,000 copies and reached 114 in the charts. We didn't mind. We really felt that, as soon as Boy George was properly photographed, or if we could get him on to Top of the Pops, his records would take off. People just had to see Boy George, and they would want to buy his music. Teenagers would go mad for him. As well as looking astonishing, George had a fabulous voice and was very witty and charming. He was a rebel in a totally different way from the Sex Pistols or James Dean, but a rebel nonetheless. Virgin brought out Culture Club's second single, I'm Afraid of Me, in June, and although it sold better than White Boy, it still only reached 100 in the charts. Culture Club carried on recording their album, Kissing to Be Clever, which they had largely written before they signed with us. When we released Culture Club's third single, Do You Really Want to Hurt Me? On September 3rd, 1982, it was our final attempt to launch the band. Funnily enough, Radio 2 played the song before Radio 1, and general reviews of the single were poor. Watered-down 4th Division reggae, wrote smash hits. Awful, but with the Radio 2 exposure it crept up the charts, up to number 85 in its first week, and number 38 in its second week. We plugged him as hard as we could, but the BBC refused to interview Boy George, calling him a transvestite. Then we heard about a cancellation on Top of the Pops. We did everything we could to get Boy George into that slot, and when Top of the Pops finally agreed, we suspected we had a sensation in the making. With his white face, his swaying robes, his felt hat and impossible arched eyebrows, Boy George beat every other sophisticated romantic band, such as Spandau Ballet, at their own game. He appealed to all teenagers, both male and female, as well as to children as young as 8 or 9 and their grandmothers to boot. It was impossible to define why he was so popular. Parents wanted to mother him. Girls wanted to be as beautiful. boys wanted their girlfriends to be as beautiful. It's impossible to quantify. The next day the telephones rang off the desks, and the orders for the single came pouring in. Do you really want to hurt me? Rose to number 3. George then appeared on Noel Edmonds' Late Late Breakfast show, and Noel asked him whether he was a great fan of Liberace. Not anymore, George said, implying that the roles had now been reversed. The single reached number 1. When George announced that he preferred a cup of tea to sex, he became an international icon. For Christmas 1982, we released Culture Club's first album, Kissing to Be Clever, which sold 4 million copies around the world. And then came another amazing breakthrough. Their 6th single, Karma Chameleon, was the top-selling single of 1983, selling over 1.4 million copies in the UK and reaching number 1 in every country around the world that had a chart, over 30 countries to our knowledge. Culture Club was a worldwide pop phenomenon, and their second album, Color by Numbers, sold almost 10 million copies. Virgin's finances were thrown upside down. From the £900,000 loss in 1980, we made a profit of £2 million in 1982 on sales of £50 million. In 1983 our sales shot up to £94 million, and our profits soared to £11 million. Once we had started the Boy George fan club, it was impossible to control it, and in 1983 40% of our profits came from Boy George. For the first 2 years the Culture Club story was the perfect model. The extraordinary thing about the record industry is how success can take off without warning. 1 minute nobody had heard of Boy George. The next minute every person around the world from Ireland to Korea and Japan to Ghana was humming Karma Chameleon. Boy George's success was measured literally by the speed of sound. Many people find such a vertical run frightening, and they would be right in thinking it creates havoc in a company. Happily, I have always thrived on havoc and adrenaline, and so I felt perfectly at home as we fanned the flames of Culture Club's success.
And that marks the end of the current chapter. Thank you for listening to The Book Reader. Stay tuned for the next episode tomorrow. Please subscribe for updates.